Have you ever heard the expression, we are what we eat? Well, how about we are what we wear? And here's the thing. Although these days we tend to think more about what we put in our bodies, we don't yet seem to think in the same way about what we put on our bodies. That's why my talk today is about slow fashion. You may have never heard about slow fashion before, but you would have heard perhaps about fast fashion, or at least fast food. And if you're starting to draw the parallels between the two, you're absolutely right, because both can be extremely damaging to the planet and the people. This is something that I found out as a writer and researcher on the topic of fashion and sustainability. But first, let me tell you a little bit how my love of fashion started. I was born 37 years ago in a country that no longer exists, called the Soviet Union. Growing up in Moscow in the 1980s, we didn't have much choice, be it for food or for clothes. And we were also taught that neither could be wasted. Let me share some of the most exciting and desirable things from my childhood. First up, bananas. Bananas were a prized commodity, and people had to queue up long hours to get them. So did I, as a child, on occasion after school. And although they were probably not the world's best bananas, I still remember them as being some of the tastiest. Next up, American jeans. Now, American jeans were a symbol of freedom and all those things that didn't exist in the Soviet Union. They could only be bought on the black market, and trafficking in jeans could land you in jail. But even wearing them could potentially get you expelled from university or fired from your job on account of wearing the arch enemy's uniform of choice. And finally, a trip to McDonald's. This is the long queue outside of the first McDonald's when it opened its doors in Moscow on a cold January morning of 1990. This was not only our first exposure to a Western fast food outlet, it was also a sign of changing times, of capitalism taking over. And Big Macs were only the beginning. Fast forward to my early 20s, the choice of everything became simply overwhelming. You could get bananas every day or a new t-shirt every week. I loved it, and I binged. Over the next 2 years, I was busy filling up my wardrobe with jackets, jeans, shoes, dresses, scarves, in every color of the rainbow. And I know I was not alone. Over the past 2 decades, our relationship with fashion has changed dramatically. The good news is that clothes have become more accessible. As a result, we're buying more and more of them and wearing them less and less. And when we're done with them, or most likely simply bored with them, we throw them away. Can you guess how many kilos of textiles each of us is actually throwing away every year? 5? 10? More? Well, the thing is, if you live in the United Kingdom, it's likely to be 30. Roughly equivalent to 30 pairs of those coveted blue jeans we saw earlier. This is what has become known as fast fashion. And this is also the main reason why fashion is now considered to be one of the world's most polluting global industries. There are many statistics, some more shocking than others. How rivers in China, for instance, literally turned the color of next season's big trend because of the poisonous effluent that goes into them untreated. Or how hazardous chemicals can be lurking in our clothes and our wardrobes. Just some of the things I've discovered when I first started looking into the impacts of fashion on the environment 6 years ago. By then, I was working with a major nature conservation organization, and at some point I wondered how my fashion choices sat alongside my otherwise green values. And this is how I began my own quest for fashion that doesn't cost the earth. But I've also discovered on that journey is that fast fashion doesn't just leave ugly scars on our planet. It is also a major culprit in modern-day slavery and industrial disasters, like the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh, in which more than 1,000 people lost their lives. The Rana Plaza tragedy gave rise to a whole new movement called Fashion Revolution, which calls on us as consumers to ask brands a very simple question: who made our clothes? And in fact, if we are asking ourselves the same question, and I admit, we would agree that we do need a fashion revolution. And believe me, as a Russian, I don't use the word revolution lightly. But I think we also need a fashion evolution. In other words, we just need to slow down. Like food, fashion is best enjoyed slowly. And slow food was in many ways the inspiration behind slow fashion, and it has become quite a trend. And speaking of trends, in this day and age of social media, I sometimes see a fashionista posting a beautiful photo of an organic apple on her social media feed. And I wonder, how about the clothes? Shouldn't she be also promoting organic cotton? And why is it that enjoying your grandma's homemade pasta is today considered cool, whereas wearing her hand-knitted jumper is not? Well, maybe not quite the same design. And although there are nowadays campaigns that encourage us to cut down on food waste by choosing, say, ugly vegetables, I somehow doubt that a similar campaign encouraging us to choose ugly, if sustainable, clothes would have as much success. So, can there be a better way to fashion? Can we all be green and glamorous, fair and fashionable, stylish and sustainable at the same time? My answer to that is yes. And the one thing we can all do is heed the advice of British fashion designer Vivienne Westwood, who encourages us to buy less, choose well, and make it last. Buying less is obvious. Today, we're literally drowning in the amount of clothes we have. Forget a designer kitchen. Today's must-have item for new homeowners is a walk-in wardrobe, some larger than a bedroom. But if you've ever experienced this feeling of staring at the bursting at the seams wardrobe with nothing to wear in the morning, you would agree that having more clothes does not necessarily make it easier, or us happier. In fact, we only tend to wear about 1/5 of the clothes already in our closets on a regular basis. We should all remember it next time we reach for that pair of blue jeans on sale. By buying less, we can also buy better by focusing and prioritizing quality over quantity. In recent years, we have become accustomed to a t-shirt that costs roughly the same amount of money as a cup of coffee. Let's think about it. How can that be? And if we are prepared to pay a little bit more for fresh, wholesome food, we should also accept that well-made clothes do cost more. But it's not an elitist issue either. Whether in a budget for high street or haute couture, we can still make responsible fashion choices. Look at the labels, ask questions, get informed. It's not as difficult. There are already encouraging signs this is happening. For instance, in emerging markets, places like China, India, Brazil, and yes, Russia, consumers are today starting to look for sustainable fashion. And finally, we need to make it last. And this is the one big difference between food and fashion. Most foods expire. Fashion doesn't. Or at least it shouldn't. Clothes used to be something we would pass down from one generation to the next. Today, they barely make it through to another season. We should not be treating our clothes as disposable items. And speaking of generations, fashion has a peculiar tendency of coming around full circle. Do you remember those flared jeans that were all the rage in the 1970s? Well, they wouldn't look out of place on today's catwalks either. My wish is that in the future, fashion becomes smarter, slower, and more sustainable by taking on board the same concept of circularity in the way we produce, use, and dispose of our clothes, and that all of us will give it a chance.